Welcome to Coffee and Conversation, a production of Empower Mississippi, where we believe everyone can rise if we remove barriers to opportunity. I'm Grant Callen, founder and president, and today we're talking with someone most of us in Central Mississippi have seen on TV for years. Our guest today is a longtime meteorologist with WLBT. She's a business owner, an author, a community leader, and a homeschool mom, which is our topic today. Barbie Bassett, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. I so appreciate this opportunity to be with you here.
Well, homeschooling is a topic near and dear to me because my parents homeschooled me growing up in Laurel, and it gave me a great start to life. This year, the pandemic has disrupted education in Mississippi like nothing we've ever seen. Nearly 25,000 Mississippi students have left the public school system this year, and early numbers indicate a lot more families are choosing to homeschool. So as more parents than ever have become first-time homeschool parents, we thought this would be a great opportunity to learn more about what homeschooling looks like in 2020. So Barbie, to start, why don't you tell us about your family and why you chose to homeschool?
So that's a great question. I've been homeschooling since my oldest, who is now a senior, was in kindergarten. So we've done it since the very beginning. I grew up in a private school, very small. I only had 16 people in my graduating class. That's how small we were. My mom at the time was a school teacher there. She taught math and science in junior high before she got into county public office. I had a really good childhood. I grew up on a farm in the Mississippi Delta in Quitman County. But I dealt with bullying. And most of the bullying that I dealt with was in the form of name calling, severe name calling, because I was an overweight child. I was obese. I had glasses. I had braces. So needless to say, I was not the cutest thing on the farm in Marks, Mississippi. But I do remember the bullying began very early on in my life. My earliest memories were around first grade. And I have many pivotal moments throughout my elementary, junior high, and high school where I wanted to come home. I wanted to leave. I was asking my parents, begging my parents to please put me in another school. Could we move? It was those types of things. And it affected my ability to learn, because when the environment in school is not conducive to learning, because a child is bullied for whatever reason, makes it extremely difficult. Yeah. And then, of course, you add on top of that growing and hormonal changes. It was just a really hard time for me. And my husband and I are Christians, and we really wanted to be the predominant voice in our kids' lives. We wanted to teach them how to think and not what to think. So putting all of these pieces together was so pivotal in our decision to homeschool from the start. Initially, at the time when I was starting to homeschool, I was the chief meteorologist at WLBT. So my shift started in the afternoons and continued throughout the evening hours. And I began to put the pieces together and think, wait, if I'm dropping our oldest child off to school, I'll drop her off 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning. By the time she gets home, I'm not there because I'll be gone to work. And then by the time she's doing her homework and time for dinner, I'm not there. So I started figuring all this out early. I'm like, wait, I'm going to literally get about an hour and a half with my child every day. And most of that would be in the very morning hours. Well, who's in a good mood in the morning, right? So it became apparent to me that I wanted to be present with my kids, and I wanted to be the strongest voice in their life instead of a school teacher who I may or may not know what their morals are, what their beliefs are, as well as the other swirling environments that we have in this world today. I wanted to be ever present. That was really my reasoning for doing this since the very beginning.
Well, and what does that homeschooling day look like? You know, some people have this assumption that, well, homeschooling must look like a traditional classroom with a chalkboard and classroom style seating. And you know, some families I know it looks more or less like that, but a lot of families that's not the way it looks. So what does a school day look like and how do you structure the day?
Well, now my kids go to a hybrid homeschool program, which has gotten quite popular in the last few years. You know, when you and I were growing up, homeschooling was thought to be truly at home all day long. But now so many communities and towns and homeschool parents are getting together and either doing what we call co-ops, or either they're gathering together and starting homeschool hybrid programs, which are typically where the student goes to a location and they are taught by current teachers or retired teachers or retired college professors. They are put in a classroom setting. They're there from roughly 8:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon, typically 2 days a week. And then the teachers tell the parents what lessons to do, what to teach the other 3 days of the week. So all three of our children have been going to a hybrid program for the last 7 years, which has been wonderful for me because, as you know, many times when we grow and we're trying to raise our kids too, we kind of forget how to multiply and divide fractions, right? Because we haven't done that since the 5th grade.
Right.
So a typical homeschool day for us here in the Bassett family is going to this hybrid homeschool program 2 days a week. And then, of course, the other 3 days, as the kids wake up in the morning, each one of them has their own specific schedule and lessons to learn. Some of this is done a little bit online with watching recorded videos or DVDs that may teach them the lesson. And then I come behind them and answer questions or check over their work. Now, my two oldest ones, I've got a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old. They're really good at doing their own work, and so I just check behind them. The youngest one, who's now 12 years old, I still kind of have to hover over her a little bit because she's in the 7th grade. But for the most part, homeschooling has made my kids very self-disciplined. To where I'm not being the one who has to teach it all. I really rely on the hybrid program as well as the other resources that I have. All three of the kids are typically finished with their homeschool day, by 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which leaves them plenty of time to do the other activities that they have outside of school. So both of my girls are in a competitive cheer group. All three of the kids take private piano lessons. We're very involved in our church. The kids are very involved in the youth group. All three of them are very involved in volunteering in our community. So this lends them more time in their day that they can do those types of things, and they're not necessarily in a school setting for 8 or 9 hours a day.
So I love the changes we've seen in the homeschooling movement since when I was growing up, because when my parents used to say to people in the 80s, yeah, we're homeschooling our kids, the first question was, what is that?
Yeah.
A lot of people had never heard of it. You know, another question was, is that legal? I kind of thought this was some kind of a secret cult or something.
Yeah.
And then the final question that people most worried about was, well, how will you socialize them?
Yeah.
Thinking that our only friendships would be in school. So clearly that hasn't been an issue for your family because they're involved in all kinds of things.
Not at all. In fact, homeschooling has allowed my kids to be probably more involved than the typical kid or teenager today, because we have more time in our day to actually get out and be a part of homeschool learning outside of the traditional setting. And they're more productive. You know, they know how to buy groceries. They know how to make change without a calculator. I remember in particular a couple of years ago when we had the total solar eclipse, complete totality. And we had done a couple of lessons on that. And of course, being a meteorologist, I thought it was kind of cool anyway. While other kids were stuck in their school setting and they could go outside for 5 minutes and then they had to rush back inside to do it, we actually packed up the vehicle and we drove right outside of a very small town near Knoxville, Tennessee. And we, camped out there and stayed there and watched the total solar eclipse. So the kids got to see it. We got to learn some of the things that we had previously learned. And then we got to spend some time in that small town, in that community, and do several other things. So socialization is not something that my kids have had an issue with. In fact, they're probably more socialized than most kids.
Yeah. What about the cost? So some people get into homeschooling because they think it might be cheaper than the tuition they're going to pay to a school. And but then it varies. So how have you found the cost to compare to a private education or something like that?
Well, much cheaper than a private education, I would say. Now, even though we do pay a tuition to this hybrid homeschool program that we go to, we're still coming in much cheaper than we would if we were to go to a traditional private school like I had gone to. But typically, my curriculum for each one of the kids cost about $500 a year. And then, of course, we add to that the hybrid program, and we have the choice with this hybrid program whether we go 1 day or 2 days a week. We have opted for the 2 days a week, like I said, for several years now. So, I would say anywhere between $500 per child upwards to, maybe $8,000 or $9,000 total if you're talking about a family, if you are being a part of a hybrid program. Now, co-ops typically don't charge for a tuition, so to speak. They might charge more of a participant fee. So maybe like $20 or $50 a semester. And you still get to have all of these different experiences outside of the home, like doing field trips and those types of things.
That's great. So Mississippi has some of the freest homeschool laws on the books compared to a lot of states. What is required on you as the homeschool parent, or are there obligations on the co-op?
Yeah, so the only thing that is required of me as a parent is I have to send in my card, my attendance card for each child to my county superintendent's office. And they just ask, what classes are the different students taking. They don't ask for curriculum specifically. So they don't want to know what type of Latin I'm teaching or what type of science that I'm teaching specifically. So typically, like for my 7th grader, I just put 7th grade math, 7th grade science, 7th grade history, 7th grade spelling, that type of thing. So you're right. They are a little bit more flexible. Some states do require that you are specific. They want to know where the book, who's the publisher of the book and that type of thing. So it's very easy for that. This year's a different year for us because my oldest is a senior. So we're, college planning and college touring and that types of thing. So this is a new road for me because I've had to call the different colleges and universities that she's interested in and find out what are their requirements.
Yeah.
So what do they want to see from a graduate who is not in a traditional school? Do I have to provide a diploma? The answer to that for all the schools that she's been applying to, no. Do they want to see a transcript? Yes. Do they want to see if she's a part of dual enrollment or AP classes? Absolutely. Yeah. But now so many colleges and universities are going to the non-standardized test options. So whereas, when you and I were looking at college, you had to submit an ACT score right. or an SAT score. Well, now colleges and universities are doing away with that. You have the option of either turning in your GPA and your transcript, or turning in your ACT score and your transcript. So things are beginning to change. There are some things I'd love to see happen, though, with Mississippi homeschooling. Like some states give a tax credit to parents who homeschool because we're paying taxes. Yep. Yet our students, our kids are not going to our local county or city schools. So some states provide that type of a benefit. Yep. Some states also allow homeschool students to take classes or be a part of the sports programs.
Yep.
Because let's face it, there are some parents who may not feel equipped to teach a high school chemistry class, but yet they still want their child to be homeschooled. So many of these other states will allow you to take a chemistry class at your local county or city school. Some private schools will even, let you do that. I think about a guy like Tim Tebow.
Right.
He was discovered, his football prowess was discovered because he was homeschooled. And in the state of Florida, they did allow homeschool students to be a part of the sporting program. And that's what he did with a local school there. And that's how he was discovered that, wow, this guy can play football. Sure. So those are some things that I wish that Mississippi legislators would be more open to, because some parents still want the flexibility and the freedom to be with their kids, but they also would like to have some options and being a part of their local schools, especially knowing that we're still having to pay taxes to the schools.
Right. Well, it's interesting. As I spend time around the legislature, we hear horror stories from other states where they are regulating and telling parents what they have to teach, and they have to have teaching degrees, and they've made it really hard. And I'm very grateful that Mississippi has legislators who understand that generally homeschooling is working great in Mississippi.
Yes.
Homeschoolers are performing really well. These kids are doing amazing things and participating in a lot of extracurricular things. And, when I was coming up, even the colleges were just learning that these homeschool students are pretty special. And the college I went to was offering a scholarship specifically for homeschool students because they were trying to recruit them. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, in fact, most colleges, including all Ivy League schools now, have a homeschool recruiter.
Wow.
That's all they do is that particular person goes after the homeschool students. And now what I found recently, again, just because we're in the stage of our life where our oldest is going to be in college in just a few months, whenever we say, oh, we're homeschooled, I'm just literally like, here's the application. It is just, please, what can we do for you? And I think a lot of it has to do with what I have personally seen in my own kids. And that is homeschool students have a tendency to be better students. They are a lot more self-disciplined. They know how to study.
Yeah.
I have to admit, even though I did graduate from a small private school, that was one thing that helped me when I went to a private college, was that I knew how to take notes. When the professor lectured, I knew exactly what to do. Whereas my counterparts, my fellow students who were graduating from large schools, whether private or public, they were lost. Yeah. They didn't know how to study. And so that's really what you need in students today. That's what colleges are looking for, is they're looking for the self-disciplined student, the well-rounded student, and not just necessarily the student that just sits in front of a book all day in a class for 8 or 9 hours and can take a test and score so high on standardized tests. They're looking for the well-rounded student. That being said, I have noticed that my 2 oldest children who have taken the standardized test have scored higher than most of their counterparts because of the extra amount of learning that we've been able to do. And we're not studying to the tests.
Yeah.
We're making such a broad learning environment.
Well, I think that's a really interesting perspective, and one that I think even a lot of public school teachers are coming to see, that this high stakes testing culture is not in the best interest of kids. It is wearing parents out. It's really not doing what we want it to do, which is to prepare kids for life. We talk about, we've sort of confused the measurement tool, which is a test. We've confused the measurement tool for the goal. The goal has never been to create kids that are great at test taking. The goal is to create kids that are lifelong learners, have had their curiosity ignited, who know how to learn for the rest of their life, because learning is going to continue long after they graduate from high school. But in a lot of ways, our public schools over the last decade have moved more and more towards this high stakes testing. And you're right. It's been a struggle for kids. I'm encouraged that what you're talking about, I think, is really starting to change the perception about the way we do public education. And I hope we're going to take some of that approach and change the way we hold public schools accountable.
Well, you've got a wonderful point there. I am one of those people who I do not test well with standardized tests. Yet I was an A plus student in school.
Yep.
But I took the ACT twice, and the highest I could get was a 21. And after taking it twice, I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to continue to stress myself out. I had enough of a score that I could get into the college of my choice. And you know what? After you got in college, nobody went around saying, hey, what'd you get on your ACT? What'd you get on your ACT? And what I quickly learned, Grant, was that my ACT score had absolutely nothing to do with my success in life. You know, I've made more money than anybody in my family, yet I had the lowest ACT score of my sister, who's a pharmacist, and my other sister, who is a school teacher, and my brother, who's a farmer. I don't think it's fair, because it really makes people like myself at a huge disadvantage, just simply because I had a hard time with logic. Yeah. Okay. And that's really what standardized tests are designed for, is it's logic. It's how do you beat the test? Yep. And that is a class actually that we have taught our 3 kids, is critical thinking and logic, because those are things that I did not learn when I was growing up, as well as, you know, we teach them Latin, they've learned Greek, because sometimes, as you know, you can figure out what the answer to a question is just simply by drilling down on the root word of the, you know, the question and that type of thing. So I think homeschooling gives everybody the advantage to grow, to learn, to expand in ways that they may not would have as the opportunity if they are in, you know, a traditional setting. Something else that I discovered over the years is sometimes kids don't necessarily function the best the same time. For instance, I have noticed that my 12-year-old, when she wakes up, she's awake. She's full speed ahead. So her first class of the day is math. I mean, that's her. Now, my 9th grader, who's 14 years old, he's not ready to think math until probably around 11:30, 12 o'clock during the day. And you and I both know that as adults, there are some tasks that we hold off and say, okay, I can't even think straight this time of the day. So imagine if you're putting all kids in the same math class at 8 o'clock in the morning, knowing that some just don't function the best. No wonder they're getting low scores or low grades. So work with the child, because everybody is different. I remember when we were teaching our youngest long division, and for her, it took about, 5 or 6 weeks before she finally got the concept of long division. If I would have had her in a regular school with 20, 25, 30 kids in there, you know, the teacher's got to move on. Right. The teacher can't wait for my one child who's having a hard time getting the concept of long division. And so that's when you start having kids being, quote, left behind. Yeah. Because the teacher's got to move on. They got to keep that pace up. And if you don't catch these things at the right time, it makes it more difficult as you move into other learning concepts. So we just stopped everything right then and there and said, let's understand long division before we even move to the next science lesson. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of put a hold on all of their subjects until she understood long division. And you would be surprised at the number of kids in regular schools who are lost in some areas like that.
Well, and these things build on one another. And if you keep it, you're going to struggle to catch the next subjects. Yep. And we know every one of these kids are different. And I mean, I have 5 kids. Each one of them is different, and they all have the same genetics. So one of the things I love about homeschooling is it gives you the freedom to customize the education or personalize it to the needs of that individual student. And I think that's very important.
That is so true. So one of the classes that my kids have taken since, 5th grade is humanities. So when you and I, or at least when I was in school, since I wasn't homeschooled, you had history and then you had literature, and they were totally separate. And so you would study your history discombobulated, not on a time frame from point A to point B. So in humanities, we teach the kids, they're learning history, but they're learning about the literature during that time period too. Why was the Apostle Paul talking about Rome in the Bible, and what was going on with Rome at that time, and what was going on in the literature at that time too? What was being written then? And so we really marry history and literature from a chronological standpoint, and it makes so much sense to kids and their brains. My oldest wants to go into the medical profession. So a lot of her science have been more human anatomy based, genetics and A&P. And, now this year she's cutting on dead things. She's going to be doing some job shadowing with actual doctors and nurse practitioners as we go into this next semester. So that way, when she gets into college, she knows if this is the field of study that she wants to continue down. These are things that most students don't have the luxury to do because they're stuck in a classroom for 8 or 9 hours.
Well, so, this pandemic has disrupted a lot of things we thought about education. We now have a lot of people that were in a traditional in-person brick and mortar school who are now doing distance learning. But I think about maybe the impact, homeschooling's probably been impacted less than any other educational setting because you were already at home or in, co-op. But my question is this: are there things that we could learn from homeschooling for maybe a parent who, maybe you have a single parent who can't homeschool, or you have parents where both parents are working? What can we learn from homeschooling that policymakers could use and implement in traditional public school or charter schools or magnet schools where homeschooling is not an option for parents? What can we learn?
I would love to see there be some type of a statewide learning platform to where you do have those parents who may be single, or maybe they work at least half the day or more. It would be convenient to be able to have their student be able to log on to some type of a platform and watch a teacher teach the math, teach the science, have the interaction. I mean, one class my oldest took a couple of years ago was a theology and philosophy class, and she took it virtually live with a school out of Pennsylvania. And so she got to know the different class members there in her class and had a lot of interaction with her teacher because the class was literally taught live. It would make it so much more convenient, especially when you have right now kids being sent home because of either quarantine or COVID. If they could just, not miss a beat and just pick right back up on what they're actually missing from the actual learning standpoint. Most parents, I don't believe, homeschool because they're afraid. They think, well, I haven't been in school for 25 or 30 years. How am I going to be able to teach this? Or what I've heard before, are you a teacher? Do you have your teaching degree? So they feel like they're not capable of teaching, but yet they would love to homeschool, because that's a question I get quite often is, your kids are so well-mannered. You don't have the drama that my kids are dealing with on a daily basis, but I could never do what you do. And I tell them, oh, but you can do what I do. And like you said, when you were growing up, it probably was your mom or your dad literally in front of you the whole time. You didn't have anything virtual. But now we have evolved, we have pivoted some to where you don't have to necessarily be in front of the parent the whole time being taught, but yet you have the luxury of the flexibility of being in that homeschool environment. That's what I would like to see, is that legislators would really be serious about this and offer people more options. That's what it's about. It's not that I didn't believe that traditional school was not for us. It's just I wanted options for my kids. And if I wanted to teach them Latin, or I wanted to teach them Greek, or I wanted to teach them Hebrew, that I could do that without them having to take extra classes outside of, once you're in class for 8 or 9 hours, who wants to go out and do anything else?
Right.
Know?
Well, it's interesting you bring up the full-time virtual option, because this is something we're working on advocating for, because Florida, 10 years ago, Florida created a full-time public virtual option that doesn't cost anything. It's paid for by your taxes. And for 10 years, it's been up and running and giving parents an option. It's not that virtual is going to be the right fit for everybody.
Right.
It's that if you're being bullied, or you're in a school where it's not the right fit for whatever reason, parents in Florida have this option of a virtual setting they can opt into. And when the pandemic hit, it was very easy to help kids across the state. Temporarily, everybody moved into it, and then they've been slowly moving back to brick and mortar, but they didn't miss a beat. We don't have that program in Mississippi, and there's no reason why we don't. We're encouraging the legislature to create that, because I think it would create the option like you're talking about.
Yeah, Florida is so ahead of the curve, and they have been for so many years when it comes to homeschooling. They're extremely pro homeschool as far as their educational system. And to those who may, say, well, hey, every kid gets bullied, and hey, that's just, a part of growing up, and as a kid. I'm telling you, what kids are growing up with today is totally different than what you and I were dealing with. It's no longer, being kicked around on the playground like when you and I were growing up. It's now electronic bullying. Yep. It's bullying through social media. It's through the phone. You still have those social situations where you're bullied, but it is much more intense today. Yeah. So it's not that you're trying to take them out of a situation so you can put them in this bubble forever. Trust me, I'd love to keep my kids in a bubble forever. But what it is helping them to concentrate on the things that are important today and now at this point in their life, like their school, like their education, like their self-confidence, instead of putting them out there to the world and expecting that a 12-year-old or that a 16-year-old can navigate the difficulties of life. Oh, and by the way, handle all 6 or 8 classes that you're taking too. We're expecting way too much by this generation that we have today, because it's different than when you and I were in school.
Yeah. Well, let me close with this. So you got a bunch of parents who are homeschooling for the first time this year, or are considering homeschooling. What would you tell somebody who's on the fence, either considering it or they just stepped into it and maybe they're scared, maybe they're not sure where to turn? What would you tell those parents if they were sitting here or watching this as the first couple of steps you should do if you're considering homeschooling?
First of all, I would talk to other parents who homeschool, because there is strength in numbers. Don't think that you're going to be at this all by yourself, because any homeschool parent can tell you we are our kids' biggest advocate when it comes to education. And there's not a single homeschooling parent out there who would not be willing to give you advice, or to at least give you in some sort of a direction. So start asking around, find people who homeschool and ask for help. That's exactly what I did. When I first started out, listen, I knew I could teach how to count. I knew I could teach ABCs. I knew I could teach phonics. It wasn't that. My big question is when my kids started getting into Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and stats and calculus, could I even remember any of this? And so I was really worried about things that were going to happen 10 years down the road, instead of just taking it one step at a time. And that's what we did. We took it one semester at a time. We took it 1 year at a time. And I always knew that I had that fallback, that if I got into this and I thought, I just don't know if I could do this anymore, I could always put my kids in the local public or the local private school, because, hey, I'm paying taxes, right?
Right.
But number 2, it was to surround myself with other people who had homeschool experience, who could connect me with some co-op groups. I was in a co-op group for about 2 years. And then finally at year 3, I was like, I got this.
Yeah.
I can do this. I don't need this anymore. And then when I found the hybrid program that my kids go to. I was like, oh, wonderful. Now they're going to get to have class parties and things that they wouldn't normally have, if I would just kept them home all the time. So ask questions and know that you just take it one semester, one day, 1 week, 1 year at a time. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know it all. That's why you ask other people, hey, what did you do? Or when you had this challenge, how did you get past this? Don't be afraid to try it. Don't let your fear talk you out of your faith and what you are, able to do. The bad part about homeschooling is I have no teacher to blame. If my kids don't understand a concept, I can't send a note to the principal. I can't send a note to the teacher. But you know what? That's also the beauty of homeschool too.
Yeah.
Is the fact that we are the ones being able to pour into our kids mentally and emotionally, and for us personally, spiritually. So that way, when they are thrown to this crazy world, they know who they are. They're not going based on what somebody thinks about them or based on the grade that they made in 10th grade geometry. They have a solid foundation as to their worth and what they are capable of doing.
Mm. Well, that is great. And this has been a delightful conversation. Barbie, thank you for taking time to visit us with us about homeschooling. And I hope we can talk again soon.
Absolutely.